Hi, this is Yurina. I will be presenting to you my project for CST 729 data warehousing under Dr. Catherine Moland, and my project name is JGYClinical Technologies. The agenda for this presentation will be the executive summary, the requirements of the project, the database design, the ER diagram, the data dictionary, administrative tasks, and also the references. I will be talking about executive summary of this project. The JGY Technical Technologies is a company that provides preventative maintenance services to hospitals all over the country for their clinical equipment. The problem statement is tracking all the preventive maintenance in many clinical equipment to make the service regularly is been a struggle to technicians and management. The solution will be creating a new web-enabled data warehouse that will be easy to use and accessed by the user for queries and reporting. JGYClinical Technologies preventative maintenance is a job that is performed regularly to minimize the chance of specific parts of equipment that will break down and repair is costly. The preventative maintenance of the clinical equipment like MRI, CT scan, ventilators, X-ray, and so on will help save money and avoid damages and follow the ISO standards. The JGY Technologies want to create a data warehouse wherein they can track all the services they provided to their customers. Along with tracking the services, they also want to track what equipment they service, the device they use, and the site where the customers are located. Preventative maintenance to the clinical technologies is done before failure has occurred. It will prolong asset or equipment lifespan. It will be increased equipment productivity, production, and profit, and reduce the risk of injury. The purpose of this project focuses on the welfare of its customer. Since their customers are hospitals, having their equipment serviced regularly will assure accurate analysis of the patient's health care. The new data warehouse will serve as a tracking on all the dates and will be the dates of the next service, the description of the service, and all the important data needed for preventive maintenance. The data will be helpful to the managers as well as the technicians who does the maintenance and to the hospital whose priority is to provide excellent service and saves lives. The data warehouse will also help the managers in identifying the equipment that needs additional repairs which result in extra expense. Also, this new data warehouse will help the managers regarding decision makings if equipment will be kept, moved to a different location, disposed of, or replaced. According to Ultimate Preventive Maintenance, the advantages having preventive maintenance are enhanced safety, longer equipment lifespan, reduced costs, lower energy consumption, and increased productivity. JGYClinical Technologies objective on preventative maintenance of the clinical equipments are servicing the equipments before failure has occurred, prolonging asset and equipment lifespan, increase equipment productivity, production and profit, and reduce risk of injury. The data warehouse will have a single view. The information must be precise and conform to business rules, accessible and responsive for analysis. It should be credible, and information must be available within the required time frame. The scope of the project will revolve around the designing of data warehouse that will provide the analysts a precise report to the executives. It will include data acquisition, data storage, and information delivery. It will also include the data sources, location, and data structures, networks, and extraction of data, and historical, if any. The outstanding issues of this project is identified as the development team should have all the access needed to write code, test, and implement the project. Any identified risk will be discussed in team meeting. The main goal of this new design for the GYG Clinical Technologies data warehouse is to provide a data warehouse web-enabled that is easy to read and accessible to users. The information delivery creates a piece of precise information in the newly designed data warehouse. The formal document will also be used as a future reference. The data warehouse will be web-enabled. The GUI will display commands that will be related to the information and action. The web-enabled data warehouse will have an internet interface that business users can analyze, save, rescue, and present the data information. The data warehouse will need to bring clickstream data, and that will be performed conventional data warehouse function. Next, the web-enabled data warehouse needs to be promoted to the users. It needs to have an official website where users can easily access the information. For system security requirements, the system security will provide the business user with a one sign-on. The feature will need a user ID and password for all the computer system. This way, the user will remember the user and ID password easily. The end users can run queries and reports using data warehouse tables. Analysts can perform complex queries and run reports. The system and network admin will allow to install and maintain operating systems and networks. The data warehouse administration can install and maintain the DBMS, provide backup and recovery to the data warehouse. For the business questions, the questions will be: who will have an access to the data warehouse? What search engine will be compatible to the new web-enabled data warehouse? How long will be the development part of this new data warehouse? Who will be the members of the project? And how much it costs to implement the new data warehouse? Here is the database design I created for this project. The clinical equipment is identified by IDs. Each type of equipment should have status, asset tag, URL, purchase date, and location. Equipment description has its entity. The preventative maintenance service is identified by ID. Each primary preventative maintenance name also has status, open date, close date, current flag, and URL. The preventative maintenance description has its entity. The model is identified by its ID. Each model should have a type, name, and cost. The customer is identified by also the customer ID. Also, it should have a name, company code, address, and status. The site is identified also by the ID, and it should come with the name, address, and status. The clinical equipment ID is the primary key of the equipment table. The relationship between equipment and preventative maintenance is one equipment to many preventative maintenance. Equipment description has its own entity identified by unique ID, and with the preventative maintenance will be the foreign key on the description table. The relationship between equipment and customer is many to one preventative maintenance. There should be only one customer to many equipment, which is identified by unique ID. The relationship between equipment and model entity is one equipment to many models, which is identified by unique IDs. Equipment ID is a foreign key on the model entity. The manufacturer model will have its entity and identified by ID. Model ID will be a foreign key on the model manufacturer table. The relationship between the equipment and service site is many equipment to one service site, which is identified by IDs as primary key. Equipment ID is the foreign key on the service key table. Here is the data dictionary created for this project. I have a table, if it is primary key or foreign key, if it is required, field name, the data type, field size, description, and example. I have 8 tables for this design. I have the preventative maintenance table, the PM description, the equipment description, the customers, the model manufacturer, and the service site. The primary key for this for the preventative maintenance table is the PM ID, and then the foreign key will be the equipment ID. For the preventative description, the primary key is the primary description ID, and then the foreign key is the PM ID. For the equipment ID is the primary key. It is an integer with a 10 field size, and that is a unique identifier. For the description ID will be the primary key, and the foreign key will be the equipment ID. For the customer ID is the primary key, and then the foreign ID is the equipment ID. There are various of data type I include in this data dictionary. I have the integer, bar chart, datetime, long text, and long text. And there are also field name here that's identified in each table, and then if it is required or not, and the description of each data of on the table. These are the administrative tasks I created for this project. The clinical equipment IDs will be entered by the administrator from the UI and will allow also the input of each type of equipment, status, asset tag, URL, purchase date, and location. Equipment description can be also entered by administrator on the UI. The preventative maintenance service will be entered by the administrator from the UI and will allow also the input of each PM name, preventative maintenance name, status, open date, close date, current flag, and URL. The description can be also entered by the administrator on the UI. The model ID can be entered by administrator from the UI and will allow also the input of each model type, name, and cost. The manufacturer model can also be entered by the administrator and the UI. The customer name will be entered by the administrator from the UI and will allow also the input of each company code's address and status. The site name will be entered by administrator from the UI and will allow also the input of each address and statuses. Most of the reference here on my presentation was taken from our textbook, The Data Warehousing by Punya. And then also took some information from online, which is the preventative maintenance plan. I retrieved it from the website. And also I got some information from the Ultimate Preventative Maintenance Guide.